Well, hello, everybody. Hello, hello, and happy Thursday to you. And I'm so looking forward to spending some time with you today. I've got a great topic in store and really looking forward to talking more about gut health, specifically gut health and small changes, how that can lead to lasting results, which is such an amazing topic. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Lesli Bytel, and I am a practice building expert, specifically for private practice entrepreneurs who want to attract more clients, sell more programs, and ultimately grow a profitable practice, integrating multiple streams of revenue. And I have a very special guest to introduce to you today. And so I want to welcome Molly. Molly, welcome. So excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Molly is she has her own private practice and her business is called Nutrition for People. Love that title. It's so fun. So we're going to talk a little bit with Molly about, kind of her background and what brought her to specialize in this particular area, specifically in gut health, a little bit about her backstory and how she goes about helping her clients be successful in this rather complicated niche, right? So again, welcome, Molly. Tell us a little bit, just to kind of kick off the conversation. Tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you decided to specialize in helping other people resolve their gut issues.
Sure. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at age 16. And it's funny
Okay.
because I know so many other gut health dietitians that have similar issues, similar story.
Yeah.
And
It's pretty
so that was in
common,
the,
right? Or I mean,
yeah,
just, like the reason quite often. So what's common is that quite often we decide to specialize in a specific area in which we ourselves have struggled. So
it
certainly that's
really,
like the case for you.
it brings that extra element. When
Yeah.
I was diagnosed, it was the 90s, and there was not a lot of research. There wasn't a lot of people out there to help.
Okay.
And it was really my parents and I kind of trying to forge this new road of what am I supposed to eat? How am I supposed to kind of deal with this? And there wasn't really anyone to help. So I'm a second career dietitian, and I transitioned from being a chef to being a dietitian with the sole
Right.
intention of doing this. So it was never a question for me of picking a niche. And then
Well,
I did
understand.
have a fantastic preceptor in my specialty rotation at UNF.
Okay.
And she really showed me, she was certified by the Integrative Institute for Functional Nutrition. And she really showed me all of these different things it was a whole new world that she opened up for me. And I'm super grateful for that.
So exciting. So, what compelled you to move from being a chef, which obviously is somewhat related, but let's be honest, like it's a lot more education, right?
Yeah.
So, what was it that compelled you to say, you know what? I maybe you enjoyed being a chef, but it's time to wrap things up and move more into a clinical space. Do you remember that decision-making process?
I do. When I was younger, school wasn't really my thing.
Okay.
And I think it became easier as I got older, certainly. But also, my mom is an eating disorder therapist. She works with food, and, she was seeing people that were kind of bariatric surgery and asked me to do a cooking class for them. And so I was actually helping them, like avocado vinaigrette instead of ranch, kind of a thing.
Okay.
And seeing their faces and seeing like what a difference it made, like still makes me feel like so warm and fuzzy inside.
Yeah.
And I was, after that, it was like, why am I making kind of overpriced food for people who, you know, can afford it and not
Right.
for people who can't, when there's such a bigger world out there
Yeah.
that I can kind of apply my skills to and help people more.
So interesting. Um, and you had mentioned to me that both of your parents are therapists. That said, I did not realize that your mom had this specific specialization.
Hmm.
with eating disorders. So, so interesting. Had you ever thought about specializing in eating disorders, just kind of based on the work that you saw your mom doing?
Yeah, no, no, I didn't. I think that, there's just like all of us, and it's been so cool, with every dietitian that I meet, it's like everyone really is different and we all have this
Yeah.
unique kind of fire.
Yeah.
And that was just never mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I love referring people, and I have so much, like, it's such a big world, just like gut health that.
Right. Yeah. And you and I were chatting a little bit before we clicked the go live button about just that there's a lot of, emotional well-being and psychological parameters when it comes to working with the gut health patient, right?
Yes.
So I'm certain I'm thinking we'll delve into that a little bit more in this conversation. So, okay, so um let's talk a little bit. So you were diagnosed at a young age,
Hmm.
right? What
Yes.
have you seen? So that, that was when you were 16 in the 90s. What have you seen shift in terms of treatment for IBD, over these, past, couple of decades or few
That's a
decades?
great question. I in my thesis, I had mentioned, for my graduate thesis, I had mentioned that the amount of research, there was, in the early times, there were less than 10,000 studies about gut health, IBG, specifically IBG and nutrition. And now there's, over 30,000 peer-reviewed studies that we can
Okay.
really kind of go to that are recent and, applicable
Yep.
to this. So with that, you're starting to see it everywhere, right? The probiotic boom and these everything uses gut health as a tagline in a marketing way, and microbiome in a marketing way. And as annoying as that can be, it's also really exciting because people are getting excited about it, and people are really saying, "Hey, there's something to this," and I think that that's important. In not only my personal care as a patient,
Yeah.
but of course in my business. But then it was, first of all, getting diagnosed was like it still kind of sounds like it's not the easiest, most fun process, but at least it's something that it's in people's consciousness. I had to go to multiple doctors who
Oh,
really
right.
just thought I had chronic fatigue, or that I was,
Oh
because
my
it's like, oh, my
God.
stomach hurts sometimes, but then sometimes it doesn't. And for a kid to say that, a teenager to say that, it's kind of like, yeah, okay,
What do you do with that?
right, right.
Okay. Yeah, that is super important. So tell us a little bit about like that experience of getting diagnosed. What was that like? I would
Uh,
imagine it would be hard, but tell us a little bit more about like how long did it take? How many doctors did you go to? And yeah, tell
so
us about that.
I went to my pediatrician, and then I think someone else. I'm from Maine, so it was like we would have to go to Portland, which was like the bigger city for the
Yeah.
next step. And then I think I went to finally a gastroenterologist. Was probably on the third try,
Okay.
and they really just kind of took us in this progression of, well, you're stressed out, you have this, you have this. And then when I was diagnosed, being 16 and getting a sigmoidoscopy or a colonoscopy or drinking the barium, I mean, that's not stuff that 16-year-old girls should have to
No,
do. So it's been a
that's
real
rough.
joy to apply that, even with the older patients, or
Mhm.
anything, because, we all go through, it's pretty, there's a lot of humility involved.
Yeah.
And in the symptoms, you're at a friend's house having diarrhea or whatever it is.
Right.
And
So
there's really no
hard.
one, we didn't have social media. So it wasn't like there was a hashtag where I could, or a support group.
You thought
So,
you were
it's come a
alone.
long way.
I'm sure you felt very alone.
I did. I did. And I'm sure that my parents did too, like looking back now.
Right. Does anyone else in your family have Crohn's?
No.
Okay, interesting. Okay. All right. So tell us a little bit about again, kind of going back to the experience that some IBD patients experience, like in the medical arena. Um, do you find that there's a disparity between what patients tend to hear from their medical professionals versus, what the reality is in terms of what they need from a nutritional standpoint?
Sure. So, first of all, I would say medication has come a long way. Certainly, I was on steroids for a long, long time. And now we
Oh,
have all these biologics. They're coming out with the
okay.
pills. That small molecule is really kind of catching on. And so, that advancement has been a gift, I think, to all of us,
Okay.
because, it's not as much like you don't have to suffer for as long before they put you on something different. It's kind
Okay.
of a little more streamlined
Yeah.
now than
Okay.
it was.
Yeah. And I can't like being on steroids,
Yeah,
especially when you were young,
right.
I would imagine that came with a whole host of unwanted side effects, right? I'm
Sure.
guessing.
Yeah. And I think with physicians, like I tell my clients and like I really tell everyone, I would not want to learn all of the things that physicians have to learn and then do individualized nutrition therapy, all within the span of 15 minutes, right? So we're diagnosing you,
Right.
we're scoping you, we're
Right.
medicating you, and
Right.
now I'm going to give you a little counseling session. It's just not feasible
It's too
with,
much.
yeah, I mean, not only with the kind of expertise required to be a physician, but also
Yeah.
in the time that they have. And I say that because people say, well, no one ever told me, or I got a handout. And it's like,
Right.
well, what do we really expect when, so often our choices are kind of dictated by insurance and time constraints and financial constraints. And as practitioners, we know, that there's a whole other side of that.
Yes.
So, we want to be empathetic to the fact that it's you may get some information from your doctor, but they're not going to be able to say, try this, then come back next week and we'll talk about it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, they can't. That's not what they're trained for. They don't have time
Right.
for it. And that's really what the RD does. Right.
Well, and if it's $200 a visit, you don't want to go back next week.
True. Yeah. Good point. Okay. So, so what would you say, like, obviously you have a private practice and your niche is IBD, right? I
It's
think you
actually
also
gut
see
health.
IBS, right? So
Yes,
it's gut
yes,
health. So it encompasses IBD,
yes.
um, as well as IBS and probably a lot of things in between, right? So
So go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so what is that trigger usually for people to say, you know what, I need help. I got to get help. I can't take this anymore.
That's a good question. Essentially, what I'm learning more and more and will continue to learn for the rest of my life is that regardless of if you have IBD or IBS or even diverticular disease,
Right.
there's always some microbiome component in
Mm,
that we have that bacterial overgrowth of some kind. So
okay.
whether it's a traditional diagnosed SIBO or not, most everyone with GI issues,
Uh-huh.
idiopathic symptoms, that kind of thing, need some sort of work done with
Okay.
the microbiome and their lifestyle in order to really get relief. And
Interesting.
personally, for myself, I have IBD, but when I found my preceptor in graduate school, it was like, oh, I also have all these IBS symptoms, and they were being treated with, Lamotil or Miralax. Um,
Right.
and that, I actually didn't have to live that way once I went through kind of what I do with people now.
Okay.
So, the research says that 65% of people with IBD have IBS
Wow.
because of this kind of microbiome imbalance, the integrity of our intestinal cells, that leaky gut kind of a
Yes.
thing. It really all goes hand in hand. So I do find that focusing on the gut health is important for me, and that there is one thing in common with everyone who does come to me, And that is that they've tried everything else.
Okay. So
So,
unfortunately, good and bad, right?
right,
Kind of the bad is that, they're kind of like at the end of their rope, so to speak.
right.
Like they've tried everything and this is like their last resort. Wouldn't it be nice if it were the other way around, right? So just so people didn't have to suffer for as long before they finally got resolution. One thing I find really interesting about what you're saying is it goes back to the microbiome, right? Even for things such as diverticulosis, I think that's what I heard you say, which I honestly, I don't think I would have connected those dots with the microbiome. Super
Because it's a
interesting.
trauma. And,
Yeah,
any trauma is going to have some effect on the enzymatic production,
right.
which is going to kind of reduce. And then that's going to let in more bacteria one way or another.
Uh-huh.
And so when we address that, and again, it's the 5R thing. So
Yeah,
Institute for Functional Medicine's 5R protocol. When
yeah,
we address that and look at that bigger picture, there is always a little tweaking that needs to be done with that, even with things that you wouldn't necessarily think about.
yeah. Fascinating. I mean, before we push the live button, I was sharing with you, we were talking about how hard it is to change. And I was sharing with you that, I've been playing around with a CGM and thinking, oh man, I gotta really kind of change my ways in certain parts of my diet. And I mean, this might be common knowledge out there, but I didn't realize until I started to get into it that even like blood sugar control kind of goes back to the microbiome, which, okay, I guess it makes sense, but it is pretty amazing. I don't know about you, but when I went to school, yeah, there wasn't such a thing. It was just like this useless track that, just, you know, created waste material, right? And there was really that was pretty much it. Pretty amazing how far we've come with that thought
Yeah.
process and just how like everything really is goes back to the microbiome. So I'd love to how do you help your clients are there any strategies that you can share um to help your clients to improve that balance in the microbiome?
Sure. Yeah. Um, so the 5R protocol developed by Institute for Functional Medicine is what many of us kind of functional root cause
Yeah.
based gut health people use. And
Okay.
what it is we're removing triggers, and we're removing any kind of overgrowth bacteria.
Okay.
And triggers could be like, excess plastic, really scented like detergents and deodorants and anything, because some people can
Okay.
become really chemical sensitive. So there's no end to what we could kind of, perhaps they live in a home that has mold, or
All
you
right.
know something like that. So it can be surface level, or it can be very, very deep.
Okay.
And we can replace nutrients. So do they have a vitamin D deficiency? Do they need enzymatic support, like with digestive enzymes? Do they need help breaking down fat, or help with their bile flow? We can replace some of those
Okay.
missing pieces for them. Then we re-inoculate with probiotics. Usually I do that last, because a lot of people in this state can't actually tolerate probiotics very well,
Oh,
because
right.
it can make them feel more bloated, or more constipated, or just like
Okay.
more uncomfortable. And then we go ahead and repair that GI tract. So, healing up that leaky gut, making sure that we kind of, I like to say, apply almost like a balm, like an aquaphor, to the inside of the GI tract,
Okay.
using, dietary interventions and also a few
Right.
supplements, and then rebalancing the lifestyle. And so that's what I do with my clients. And every single client is so different. But like I said, what they do have in common is that they have been around the block. And as someone who has also been, I understand that. And something that I really have had the joy of learning is, you know, just like I feel like I need to reach out to people like you and people like other mentors in the gut health community for reassurance and for information and for
Yeah.
direction. They need that too. And so, just like with that, I want to say I want to make sure and assess, where they really are at,
Mm.
because this is an overwhelming. Even just saying that, it's like, oh gosh, where do we start?
Right. I was
So
going to
I don't
ask.
want to hit people.
Yeah, it's a lot, right? So, and I do want to ask you a little bit more about how you prevent that overwhelm, but I am curious, what, because man, you start going into like all the potential environmental toxins and all these things that you could potentially remove. How do you assess that? Like, I honestly, it'd be really tough. I think, like, where do you start with that one?
So I think the more people that you see, the better of an idea that you kind of get,
Okay.
first of all, about where they're coming from.
Yep.
You know, and it's just through really deep questions. I send them a very detailed questionnaire before I meet with them, and then I
Okay.
review it. And I also have a call with them for a little while before we actually meet.
Okay.
So I probably gather information for over an hour before I even talk to them and gather more information.
Okay.
Um, so, of course, one of the questions is, have you ever had Lyme disease? Have you ever been exposed to mold? Have you ever lived in a home where the basement flooded?
Okay.
Do you use scented products? And then there are clues as well.
Yeah.
But I ask those questions and then I don't elaborate. So I'm not going to say, because if you do, then we're going to do this, this,
Right.
this, and
Right.
this.
Yeah.
Because that
It's
would
just
send anybody running. And also I don't know what we're going to do. And that's kind of the fun part.
okay. Yeah. Truly being a detective, right? Um, okay. That sounds amazing. So let's talk a little bit about your approach to kind of mitigate that information overwhelm that so many people must really struggle with, right? Because it's just so much. And like, let's be honest, normal people don't really know what a microbiome is, right? They just
Right.
don't, nor should they, right? I mean,
Right.
maybe you're super well-read person, but for the most part, it's not like they just don't know. They don't even know what they don't know. So how do you prevent that just overwhelm from happening?
So, I think the first thing that I always encourage is this is how you're feeling. And you're feeling that way because either what you're absorbing or eating is reacting with some bacteria in your gut.
Okay.
And so it's not the food. I mean, certainly food sensitivities are a huge part of this. But overall, your symptoms are being manipulated by what's going on when you ingest whatever it is that you're ingesting.
Right.
So instead of us, trying to and everyone comes to me and says, well, I want to be gluten free but I can't, and then I stop dairy but then I have ice cream on Wednesdays with my mom, and then you know what I mean.
Right.
And then I read that I'm not supposed to have dark chocolate because it has arsenic in it, so instead I have, I spend $19 a bar, and all of,
Right.
it's like, and we know because we're healthcare professionals, like, yeah, that's how I feel sometimes too, with all this stuff that I know. I could just stand in that grocery store and read every label until the end of time. um, but
Yeah.
that's not going to get me anywhere.
Right.
I want to be able to leave the grocery store and live my life. So how am I going to be able to do that? And how can I
Yeah.
help these people do that by saying, okay, so let's start as far as environmental stuff, just replace stop the unstoppables. For example, those little scented pellets, unplug the Glade plug-in,
Oh yeah.
um, that kind of thing. And
Oh
then
yeah.
once they
Like
start
low
to,
hanging fruit, right?
right.
I
And
always
then in
call that the
another
low
week,
hanging fruit.
when you get low on your scented detergent, just try an unscented one time. And then I
Okay.
just never tell them to switch back, right?
Okay. Yeah. Got it.
And then for food, it's like, Well, let's look at your symptoms, and then again with the low hanging fruit, what's going to have the biggest impact for them
Yeah.
that they'll see an instant improvement and feel more motivated and trust me more so that we can keep changing.
Right.
So if you came to me and you were extremely bloated and you were eating a huge salad for lunch every day, then we would give you a list of other things that you could eat for lunch that were equally as easy to prepare.
Mhm.
We would ask if you're using straws to drink your drinks. Are you
Right.
drinking carbonated beverages? And just those three things.
Okay.
So let's flip those. And then when I see you again, you're going to feel better. So then, a little bit. And
Yeah.
so then we can talk about, okay, so what else and how did that
What's
feel?
next?
And where can we go from there that doesn't feel like too much? Because I think what we all need to remember is that gut health is, obviously directly related to our brain. And
Yeah.
we're all a little, worked up, um, us GI cases. And so that being said, not only that's part of my rebalancing for you is to put your mind at ease and say, listen, you don't have to avoid every ingredient today. You know, there are
Yeah.
things that you may never be able to avoid. Um, and that's okay because we can make changes over here and over here.
Okay.
And slowly, those are going to help. And it's better than you feeling like you have to make all the changes and then never doing anything, right?
Absolutely. I love how you put that into such good perspective. And it sounds like your approach is like, let's check off the opportunities where you're going to get a big return on your investment, so to speak, right?
Right.
Your effort, and then we'll add from there. I love that. What are some of the things that you recommend to other GI clinicians?
So the first thing is, and someone said this to me, and I loved it. This is there's not enough of us, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, if someone is in your space and seeing this, then perhaps they are in tune with some more of the functional side of things.
Mhm.
And as someone who lived this, and as someone who helps so many people every day with this, I've got to say that the more present we can be, if you're interested in this field, like dig in, find a mentor, get some education, read the articles because we need more people doing
Mhm.
this.
That's
And then
awesome.
another thing is the only bad food, in my opinion, and the opinion of multiple people that I know and trust, the only bad food has mold on it. So
Oh,
there are
okay.
no, it's not ice cream is bad. Like
Okay.
ice cream is a choice that you made that gave you diarrhea.
Okay.
So what are we going to do next time? You know, and remembering that, there's a lot of shame. Like I'm personally trying to eliminate gluten from my diet. And because I was a chef before, I there's a lot of like little things that I add to stuff and like
Yeah.
elaborate things. So there's not a lot of options unless you want to lean on those processed foods, which obviously I
Okay.
don't. And
Right.
the other person in my home does not have interest in that. So it's hard, like you're saying with CGM. I mean,
Yeah.
to change your life and to make a big dietary change like that, it requires time. And it also requires someone who's patient with you
Yeah.
and who isn't going to bring, like a demand that is immediate or any kind of feelings of, well, why didn't you? I mean, I think we want to kind of nurture some of our people because they tend to have higher anxiety and because
So
these
true.
changes that really make a big difference are huge. So you've got
Right.
to start low and work your way up, it's very hard to have success, in my opinion.
Right. Oh, I can definitely see that, especially in GI. Really, really huge. Let's talk a little bit about the FODMAP diet, shall we? I'm so curious about this because, yeah, so here's what I've heard kind of after working with, many GI practitioners is that this is kind of the go-to in turn like so a patient, gets a colonoscopy, like all the things, the full workup, and even, for IBS as an example, typically it sounds like the go-to is the FODMAP diet. So they're given a piece of paper, right, from the office, and they say, here you go follow it. Is that what you're still experiencing and seeing?
That's a great question. So basically, the FODMAP diet is essentially the only diet that's ever been studied
Okay.
enough for us to, as dietitians, evidence-based practitioners,
Mhm.
and for physicians to actually recommend with any kind of prayer. Um,
Right.
because at least we know that it works, and it works because it removes the fibers that interact with that bacteria
Mm,
and that feed that bacteria. So again, directly related. What if we got rid of the bacteria? Then we can reintroduce these foods. So
okay.
my major goal is to get people enjoying the widest variety of foods possible.
Right.
So while yes, FODMAP fibers generally tend to be higher in sugar, or like higher in instantly available sugar, and also cause a lot of bloat, or cause diarrhea, then it's great to avoid them. But peripheral things like, for example, plums, I'm not going to tell people you can't eat anything on this list. You know what I mean? Ever until
Right.
we're done with our 8 week, period of whatever it is.
Okay.
And because that's not necessarily, I don't think that that's, again, I think that's too big of a change. The FODMAP
Okay.
category is gigantic. And, honey and sugar and, you know what I mean? Dairy and wheat and any kind of garlic or
Lot.
onions. It's a lot. Um, so there are some wonderful products out there that really support it. In a case where someone cannot tolerate anything, absolutely, it has its place and it's a
Yep.
very valuable resource. And it does. If somebody gives you a handout and you follow it, that's great because you are going to probably feel a little better.
Mhm.
But then people come to me and say, I'm so afraid of corn, I make my own baking powder, because I can't eat any FODMAPs and I haven't eaten them
Oh.
in 6 years.
Oh my
And
gosh, that's not the
FODMAPs
idea, as far as I know,
FODMAPs,
right?
I know, I know,
You're
but
not
they're
supposed to
also like
avoid them
all those
forever,
good,
right? It's
right?
temporary.
Right. It's meant to be in all the research studies that I reviewed, and I've done a lot of research on this. The
Yeah.
majority of people do not exceed 12 weeks ever. So,
Okay.
what happens after that 12 weeks? You've got to get these prebiotic fibers back into your body so that you can feed the good gut
Okay.
bacteria.
Okay.
Um, so we need to work on a way for you to tolerate that, and I also don't want you to live your life avoiding all of these
So
foods.
extreme.
Right. So we've got to just bring it back. I mean, it has its place, it can be helpful.
Mhm.
Certainly it eliminates a lot of trigger foods for things like diarrhea
Right?
and bloat, which are the top two things that get fixed with the low FODMAP diet,
Uh-huh.
but no one ever tells them to reintroduce.
Right. That's huge. Yeah. And if they're like 6 years later still
Right.
avoiding like that, that's really an issue. So, yeah, as we kind of start to wrap up, kind of going back to that emotional component, having grown up with two therapists for parents, how do you feel like that trickles down into the work that you do today? I'm
I think there are
sure
some
it's a
things,
huge impact.
I guess it's funny because the some things become intuitive. So maybe I would notice something that somebody else wouldn't notice in body language or in
Hmm.
the way that they're talking about something.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, even still though, traditional school and IFNA have really kind of helped me remember like the trauma piece and
Okay.
all of these other things that can really trigger some of this stuff.
Okay.
But in general, I feel like I have been given the gift of being a little more empathetic and a little more in tune perhaps with what someone is not saying.
So good. So, so good. Yeah, kind of reading between the lines, right? And just being really intuitive. I love that. Yeah, I know. I'm so fascinated by what it must have been like for you, growing up in a family with two therapists. I'm really interested in that because, as I shared with you, that was not the case, right, for me. So I had to kind of learn, I had to learn all that as an adult, right? Like feelings, like what are feelings, right? And it's okay to have your own feelings. And yeah, a lot of post childhood learning, shall we say. Um, super, super interesting. So, is there any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share as we start to wrap up for today?
I want to say two things. Number one, remember the impact that this person has been through. So perhaps they're on a $5 a month prescription of Linzess and it's not working, and they've eliminated 20
Okay.
foods and that's not working either.
Yep.
Then we want to give back. We don't want to keep taking away.
Mhm.
So whatever we can give back in terms of sympathy or empathy, in terms of a different answer, but also in terms
Yep.
of supporting them to say, listen, I know you're holding on to this with a death grip, but it's not working. So, and also working with the team, the interdisciplinary team, because I would never tell someone, obviously, to manipulate their medication. I would say, go talk to your doctor about it. But I've never sent someone to their doctor to talk about it and had their doctor say, well, you're an idiot. You know what I mean? Like, they're
Right.
usually extremely understanding and are willing to have that conversation. Like, well, give
Yep.
this a try, or let's change this, or something
Okay.
like that. um, and the interdisciplinary piece is huge. And then the other thing is, it just kills me when I see on social media, you know, um, this is just wrong, and this is gonna kill
Oh,
you, and any canola oil, or anytime you ever have a plastic cup, you are killing yourself and you're ruining
okay.
your gut. And the fact is, like, we're all gonna have a plastic cup once in a while.
Right.
um, and it's important, I think, for us as practitioners to understand what we know and to translate that in a way that is caring and not so extreme. You can
Right.
say, these are the facts, this is the research, this is what I know,
Mm-hmm.
but you've got to then say, here's what you can do, or even if you just make this change, it'll be an improvement. Like,
Right.
don't eat fried food every day, and instead, choose maybe avocado oil at home. But don't go around, like, to the Whole Foods hot bar reading what kind of oil they used and then thinking that you're a bad person because you're trying to get Brussels sprouts on the
Right.
go. you know
Right. Oh my gosh, such a great point. Yeah, so kind of putting things in perspective, and instead of it being so black and white, which I think really provokes like almost a sense of fear, kind of perpetuates
right.
a fear-based approach perhaps. Yeah, that is such great advice and recommendation. Such a good recommendation for everyone. All right, guys. So thank you so much, Molly. This
Thank
was
you.
super compelling. And honestly, I learned a ton. So I'm really excited about that. And for those of you that want to learn more about Molly and her work, I invite you to go to her website, which is www.nutritionforpeople.com, and you can get a better sense of the work that she does and a little bit more about her approach. And yeah, and so happy Thursday again. FYI, we did pre-record this episode because while this is airing, I will be on an airplane headed to the Integrative Health Symposium in New York City. So if by chance you're going to be there and you hear this message, give me an email, Lesli@lesliebytel.com. In fact, Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, we're planning on meeting for a little happy hour. So drop me a line, and I'll be sure to share the location and some of those details. All right, guys. So anyway, I'm really excited about that. Hope to see some of you in New York City. And thanks again, Molly. Really appreciate your time today and your willingness to share all of these great tidbits with
Thanks.
both myself as well as our audience today. All right, guys.
Appreciate the
Yep,
opportunity.
you bet. All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day. And I will look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye for now.